How is abortion viewed within Judaism? This is not a simple topic. Anyone who says that it's simple or presents it as simple and gives one narrow-minded perspective and comes to an ideological based conclusion is ignoring a lot of other sources and a lot of other perspectives. So I spoke with a big rabbi, a true posek, about this issue, and I wanted to present a well-rounded, open-minded perspective of abortion within Judaism based on the sources. Now, if you're someone who thinks it's black and white or wishes it was black and white, I'm sorry, this video might disappoint you. But if you're interested in learning the truth as far as what the Jewish sources say, please stick around. This video is going to be a little bit longer, but there's a lot to go through, and I'm going to do my best to present it as I heard it and present it in a clear way. So the first main source we have for abortion within the Jewish community, within the people of Israel, is a situation given in Exodus 21 verse 22, and this is a situation where there's two men fighting, and in the midst of their fight, they either knock or something happens to a pregnant woman. The pregnant woman gets hurt, and this results in her having a miscarriage. So the Torah treats this as a monetary issue. In other words, it's not a capital offense. It's not considered murder. If the situation would happen, which would result in the woman losing her life, theoretically, if other criteria are met, it could be a capital offense. But in the case of a miscarriage, it's treated as a monetary offense. So the few rabbis who take the most lenient approach say, okay, so it's property and the woman has the right to do with her property whatever she wants. So they see this as a green light for abortion. This is the opinion of few. But in my opinion, they're ignoring a lot of other sources through the corpus of Jewish tradition. The next clear-cut case of Halacha, Jewish guidance that we have comes from the Talmud. In the Talmud about abortion, it says that an abortion should be performed to save the life of a pregnant mother. What does it mean to save her life? It doesn't mean that to save her life so she could go to dental school and make a nice living and make a lot of money. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about her immediate physical health. Her life is in danger because of this pregnancy. And if the baby is terminated, if there's an abortion, it's going to save her life. The Talmud says in this situation, we have to perform the abortion. Now, what's the cutoff line? When does the Talmud say the abortion can't be performed anymore? It says when the forehead is exposed from the mother. In other words, she's giving birth and the head's coming out. Once the forehead is past, the Talmud says we can't chase away one life for the other. In other words, we can't kill the baby to save the mother, and we can't kill the mother to save the baby once the forehead is out. Now, most people see this as the very clear-cut halacha, a very clearly defined guidance. The Talmud also has agadic statements about when the soul comes into the baby, but agada is teachings that don't have a halachic implication. It means that they're spiritual teachings, inspirational teachings, interesting teachings based on tradition that we could derive moral lessons from, but those agadic statements don't find their way into how the halakha is applied. But what the Talmud does say, and what's been proven by science, is that for the first 40 days, there's no human form. The Talmud says it's like water, it's like fluid, and anybody who's, God forbid, had a miscarriage within this time frame will tell you that there's no human form. It's cells. Now, does it mean that those cells don't contain life? That's not what it means. But is it a human form? No, it's not a human being. Pretty soon after those 40 days, or actually right after those 40 days, a human starts to form. A human is forming. These 40 days have a lot of implications in practical situations where rabbis decide if a woman is allowed to have an abortion or not. And abortions within the Jewish community, they're almost always handled by speaking to a real authority, presenting the situation, saying they either want to have an abortion or can we have an abortion, and they get an answer. And rabbis are very careful. Hopefully they weigh the sources and are careful and give advice. Rabbis will take into account these 40 days in rendering a decision. It doesn't mean that before the 40 days it's an automatic green light. After 40 days, a baby starts to form. It's a human being. I've heard the ideological argument that because the Talmud says we don't chase away life from once the forehead is outside of the mother, then that must mean that Judaism believes that life begins at birth, at first breath. My question is, where does it say that? It says what it says. It says we can't chase one life away from the other. Where does it say that we believe that that's when the life actually begins? And even if it did say that clearly and explicitly, this rabbi I consulted had a very interesting point that I want to share with you. In the time of the Talmud, the scientific facts they presented were the best science they had at the time. It doesn't mean they were accurate. We're talking about sages who lived 2,000 years ago, who had nowhere near the technology that we have today and the scientific advancements that we had today, and it's not even close, and it's not even a valid comparison. So the scientific decisions in the Talmud are generally not considered in the way Judaism is practiced. For example, it says in the Talmud that certain types of cucumbers are harmful to the stomach, and it says a lot of other things that would be considered folk medicine today. Now, there are some people who say that, oh, the cucumbers were different back then, and in those days they hurt the stomach, but now they're the same. Or there are people who make excuses for their scientific opinions. But generally, many scholars agree that in the realm of Halacha, we don't take this Talmud's scientific statements into consideration. Even if the Talmud said that life begins when the baby comes out, we can see from science that it's simply not true. A few weeks after pregnancy and after those 40 days, once the baby starts to form, there's brain waves, there's heartbeats, there's feelings. Scientists have been able to sense great pain that babies have. There was a doctor who had to do a surgery on a pregnant woman a few years ago, and when he had his hand in the womb, they saw with the ultrasound or whatever visual equipment they were using, the baby reached out his hand and grabbed the doctor's finger. It's very clear to see that these are living human beings. The only difference when they come out is that the way they breathe and the way they eat. In all of their considerations, they're human beings like us, less developed. So to say that Judaism believes that life begins at first breath, like I saw somebody say, it seems backwards to me. It seems like taking the scientific statements of the Talmud as fact. The statements in the Talmud that are halacha, that are about Jewish practice, we take those authoritative. But the statements about science, we need to bring them into the lens of reality and into our generations. To say that life begins at first breath, it seems like a backwards opinion to me. If, and I'm not saying it does, the Talmud would say the world is flat, would you say that, oh, the Talmud says the world is flat, even if scientific evidence suggests otherwise? And there are also a couple statements about abortion in the Zohar, and like Agada, we don't base our practical Jewish observance on Kabbalah, but Kabbalah definitely can and perhaps should inform our worldview and our perspective on things. So there are a couple statements in the Zohar about abortion. The first one is that there are suffering souls. The Zohar says that there are suffering, persecuted souls, and it defines them. Who are they? They're the souls of children who have been aborted. The second thing it says is that abortion causes the Spirit of God, the divine presence, to be abandoned from the earth. And these are very harsh statements, but it's talking about abortion. So we can understand that technically, according to the Talmud, abortion is permitted in certain situations to save the mother's life. But we can also understand from the side of Kabbalah and from the side of science that abortion is a serious thing and it's not something that's considered light. Now, what do Jewish sources say about abortion for the rest of the world, for the nations? This is something that I found very interesting, that I wasn't expecting. The Talmud actually takes a stricter stance for abortion for the nations. The Jewish tradition teaches that there were 7 commandments given to Noach and his generation, 6 to Adam, 1 to Noach. And these commandments are guidance for the whole world to follow. The Torah, the 613 commandments, were given to Israel through Hashem, God, through Moses on Mount Sinai over 3,000 years ago. But before that, there were certain guidance given to the entire world, 7 simple guidance for all mankind to follow. One of these guidance is not to kill, not to murder. And we find this in Parshat Noach, where there's a prohibition to spill human blood. Now, there's a statement in the Talmud that connects this exact verse to abortion. So some people disagree, but a very simple reading of that statement in the Talmud and that statement in the Torah and the 7 mitzvot of Noah, the 7 guidance of Noah, most authorities agree that the nations of the world have to be even more careful not to do abortions. Also, one of the 7 commandments of Noah is to establish courts of law to uphold the other 6 commandments. So any legislative action to restrict abortion and to make it more difficult to get and not to encourage it or make it easy, I believe is a very positive thing that aligns with really God's will within the Jewish community. Unless you go to a very, very lenient, left-leaning rabbi, abortion is not permitted for any circumstances. It's permitted within a certain section, within a certain criteria. There are many Jewish people who are hesitant to speak against abortion and who are hesitant to support Roe v. Wade being overturned. There's a certain fear that if legislature takes a very hard right turn and abortion becomes super illegal, that even the situations where an abortion is permitted within Judaism might become illegal, and there are people who are afraid of that happening. But the people who do speak about it freely and who support the original ruling of Roe v. Wade are very manipulative of the sources and saying, oh, look at this, what this rabbi said, Judaism allows abortion, life begins at this stage. And again, I think that's a backwards opinion, taking the science of the Gemara and using it as authoritative when that's not what's supposed to be done. Taking 2,000-year-old the science, which is the best science they had of the day, and to apply it to today, when today we have much better science. So I should look at the science and have a worldview based on the sources and based on the scriptures and based on the Kabbalah and based on the Jewish tradition. So I'm very happy Roe v. Wade's being overturned, and I believe that any steps a government can make towards helping their population to align with God's will is a positive thing.